Welcome back to the Guitar Learning Show. My name is Kevin, and in a previous lesson, I showed you the basic triad shapes on strings 2, 3, and 4, and how they connect to chords, chord tones, and scales. In today's lesson, we're going to go a little bit deeper. I want you to really understand what triads are, where the notes come from, and why knowing your chord shapes mean you automatically know where the notes are. If you've ever felt lost trying to memorize the fretboard, this lesson is for you. So let's slow this way down. A triad is not a shape. A triad is 3 specific notes that are taken from a scale. Every major chord comes from the major scale, and every minor chord comes from the minor scale. And when you play a triad, you're not guessing. You're selecting 3 notes that already belong together. So a triad is 3 notes of a scale, and they are a third away from each other. So let's take the C major scale. This scale consists of C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And if we take the first 3 notes as thirds, we have C, E, and G. So let's go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So that's the scale. And now if we just take the thirds, the first 3, and let me point out, in counting the notes, we're not necessarily going to always go up an even number of frets because we have some of the notes are only a half step away, for instance, E to F or B to C. So we're going to have C, E, and G. And playing that linearly, that's our chord. So we can't really play the chord that way. So we, of course, play chords like a C, open C chord would be. Now that's using 5 strings, and with triads, we're only going to use the 3 notes of the chord, and we're only going to use 3 strings. We're going to use, in this lesson today, we're going to use strings 2, 3, and 4. So these notes are also known as the root, which is the C, third, which is the E, and the fifth, which is the G. So a chord consists of a root, third, and a fifth. Here's a C chord. And that's root, third, fifth. And so these chord tones, when played together, they make up the quote-unquote chord. And of course, when we all first started playing guitar, we learned how to play all of the open string chords, or the cowboy chords that are way down here on the neck, close to the nut. And many of those shapes, they use 5 to 6 strings, which it's a little bit harder to do that, which is why I do enjoy using triads to play a lot of things. It makes playing songs easier, and it makes soloing easier. And I'll get into why I think it makes soloing easier in just a few minutes. Okay, so playing a C chord, and then playing the notes of that chord, or what's called arpeggiating the chord. Even though they're the same notes, they don't, of course, sound exactly the same. One is strummed, the other is separated. That's why triad soloing works so well. You're playing the harmony of note by note. And we're focusing on strings 2, 3, and 4 for a reason. They sit right in the middle of the guitar, not too low, not too high, and they're perfect for melody. Most importantly, they let us see the chords and scales at the same time. And this string set is where the fretboard really starts to make sense. Let's start with the root position triads. The root position is simply, it's your anchor. The root note is the lowest note in the triad. And if you know where the root is, the rest of the triad is going to be right there for you. The shape isn't random. It comes directly from the chord. We'll start with the root triads. where the root note is on the D string, okay? So we just played a C, we'll go back to that. So the C triad you're gonna play with, for a C chord, the root is here on the 10th fret of the D string, that's your C, and then your E is up here on the 9th fret of the G string, and then your G is here on the 8th fret of the B string, okay? And that is your root triad, because the root note of the chord, the C, it's the lowest note, okay? And until you really know the fretboard, you can find those roots by using the diagonal rule. I like to call it the diagonal rule anyway. So the diagonal rule does require that you memorize all the notes on the low E string and all the notes on the A string, okay? So if we go to the 8th fret of the low E, that's our C note. And then if we go 2 frets up and 2 strings up, we're now at the 10th fret of the D string. And that's our C, and that's where we started before with the chord. And so that helps us to find the notes if we don't know where the notes are on the D string, okay? It's a really good reference point. So if we know where this chord lives on the guitar neck, then we automatically know where the notes are. So if we know that we're playing the root chord, the root triad, and we know that this is root, third, fifth, if we do have to know that a C chord is a C, E, and a G, but if we do this, we put our fingers here, we know C, E, G. And after a while, you start to think about where these notes are, especially if when you're practicing them, you say the notes while you're playing them. For instance, C, E, G. And that helps your brain start to really memorize where these notes actually are. So you begin to know things like, oh, the 8th fret of the B string is where my G note is. And the 9th fret of the G string is where my E is. And then you eventually don't need to use the diagonal rule in order to find the C note, okay? So that's the root triad, all right? And you might recognize that as being, if you know your bar chords, that's a full C bar chord. And all that triad is, it's the middle part of that bar chord, okay? We're just fingering it a little bit differently. But that's all it is. And really, at the end of the day, all these triads are just a small piece of a bigger bar chord, okay? If we at least understand the bar chords, even if they're difficult to play or difficult to get the shapes down, if we know the bar chords, then we could get at least a feel for where the triads are, and that will help us find the notes, okay? All right, so I do want to reiterate that if you know where the chords live on the neck, then you automatically know where those notes are. And it's really important because you don't find the notes first, you find the chords first. We all learn to make shapes, and I think as guitarists, we're very shape driven. The scales are shapes, the chords are shapes, all these different things are shape driven. So if we know what the chord shape is, and then we have just a little more understanding of what makes up the chord, then the next logical thing we're going to know is what the notes are and where these notes are located under our fingers when we place them on the fretboard, okay? All right, now let's move on to the first inversion. The first inversion means that the third of the chord is now the lowest note. We didn't add any notes, we didn't change any keys, we're just rearranging those same 3 notes. So that being the case, that chord's going to move somewhere else on the neck. So the first chord we looked at, the root, which is part of the E bar chord essentially, was up here, rooted on the 10th fret of the D string, okay? since the third is now going to be the lowest note, the root is actually going to be the highest note. So we are going to need to, if we're going to play a C chord, we're going to need to find a C on the B string. And probably the easiest place to play that would be here on the 13th fret, okay? So 13th fret of the B string is our C note, and then that's of course our root, and then our third is going to be just up here on the 14th fret of the D string, and we'll just play that with our ring finger, and then we place the index here on the G string, on the G note, which is the 12th fret, okay? And then that is the first inversion of the C triad. I've shown how we can play a C chord here as the root. And we can also play it up here, rooted at the 13th fret of the B string. Same notes, but obviously sound different, so you get different voicing. And the beauty of this, and I'll demonstrate this after we go over the second inversion, but the triads allow you to stay within one or two positions on the fretboard as opposed to moving all over the place. For instance, let's say we do a C major chord progression, okay? Look at how much real estate this is going to take up on the fretboard if I don't use any of the inversions, okay? So we go C to G to A minor to F. So we're moving around 3 positions on the fretboard. Inversions, though, they let you stay within the same 1 to 2 positions and not really have to move around a lot, which makes for smoother and faster chord changes, okay? All right. So now let's take a look at the second inversion. The second inversion means that the fifth is now the lowest note. So for the root was the lowest note. For the first inversion, the third was the lowest note. Now with the second inversion, the fifth will be the lowest note, okay? So again, same notes, different order. Root position, first inversion, second inversion. This is the full map of the chord on these 3 strings. So once you see this, the fretboard stops feeling random, and the root can be found using the diagonal rule from the A string for the second inversion, okay? Let's play a C chord. The C note is going to be on the 3rd fret of the A string. And if we go 2 frets up the fretboard and 2 strings down, we are going to be here on the 5th fret of the G string using our diagonal rule, and that is going to be our C chord for this inversion. Now, this inversion is really simple to play. So the C is essentially in the middle. It's not the highest, it's not the lowest. The way this chord works out is all the notes are on the 5th fret, okay? So if you bar either a ring finger or an index finger, or whatever you like, I a lot of times end up barring my ring because I might be playing here. Sometimes I'll bar here if I'm playing, like, say, an F chord, let's say. I might, if I'm going from an F back to the C, I'll use my index. But if I'm over here, maybe I'm doing a C to a G, I'll bar it with my ring. Whatever's fastest and most efficient and most comfortable for you. So, at any rate, back to how this chord works out. So the C is here on the 5th fret of the G string, and then going up 1 string to the B string, that's our E, that's our 3rd. And then going down to the 5th fret of the D string, that's going to be our G, which is our 5th, okay? So here's the connection that most players miss. These triads come directly from the scale. The scale is the big picture. The triad is the most important part of that picture. So when you solo with triads, you're not avoiding the scale. You're targeting the strongest notes inside the scale. And that's why triad solos, they sound intentional instead of like just playing scales. They're just like exercises. Now let's talk about soloing. When the chord changes, the notes change, but not as much as you think. Some of these chords share the same notes. Your job is to move to the closest inversion of the next chords. I'm not thinking scale shapes at that point. I'm thinking, where's the chord? Which chord can I play here? And once I find the chord, the notes are already there. And again, if you know where the chords are, you know where the notes are. All right, so we'll go from C to G. That was second inversion of the C to the root of the G. And now we're going to do an A minor. And that's the root of the A minor, okay? And now we're going to go to an F chord, and this is first inversion. Or let's say you wanted to go from F to C. You could just go F, and then C, maybe back to A minor, and maybe over to G. But within just a very small amount of space, you can work with these chord tones to a backing track. And here's how I would recommend practicing this. I'd find one chord on strings 2, 3, and 4 and play the root position, first inversion, second inversion, and name the notes as you play them. Solo using only those notes. And I would do it really slowly because you want to understand that if you are getting the notes correctly and you're getting the notes on the chord changes, that speed will come with time. Speed will come after that, okay? Triads, they're not a trick. They're really the foundation. When I first started playing guitar, I wanted to play songs, of course. And I took lessons and I did the exercises that I was given to do. And on my own time, I guess, I would look up riffs online and learn how to play different riffs. And everybody probably starts with Smoke on the Water or Day Tripper or things like that. And I learned those things and it was fun to do that stuff. And then I would learn how to play like easier songs. But I got to a point where I wanted to understand, what is all of this? And how can I navigate it to where I can just play freely, whatever I felt like playing. You know, we call it improvisation, of course, but I just wanted to play stuff and have it sound decent. And so that's what triads did for me. When I learned how to play triads and I started memorizing the different inversions, where to find the roots, it became easier to find the other notes of the chords because I was looking for chords and not for notes anymore. So I hope this lesson helps you to explore the fretboard more in a way that you are able to make music. If you would hit that subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. And thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.